Madam Clerk.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Madam Clerk, for the
Yes, sir.
purposes of this meeting and for voting, any votes that we do, we'll do a roll call vote if that's appropriate, okay?
Yes, Mr.
All right. All right, well,
Has anybody heard from Catherine this morning?
No, I just sent her a text to get on.
Thank you, John.
okay.
Am I heard?
Commissioner Williams, could you restate your question?
No, I was just asking if I was heard. I couldn't tell.
Yes, sir. We hear you loud and clear.
So good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Okay. All right, we'll call this meeting to order. Chair recognizes Madam Clerk.
Yes, sir. Today's meeting is to adopt proposed 2022 millage rate.
Okay. All right, we've had a series of presentations, or at least I had a presentation and several conversations on this past Tuesday. I'm not sure if we need to go through a full presentation at this point. I know there were still some questions that were in people's minds with regards to what our posture is, what has been proposed, particularly for the purposes of publishing that in the local Daily Oregon newspaper, is what we are wanting to accomplish on today. I know that there's been some additional information provided by the commissioner from the 8th, and I will certainly give him an opportunity to talk about that. But what I'd like to do is begin with our Director of Finance with an abbreviated presentation of what's being proposed, and then we'll have some questions. And the commissioner from the 8th, I'll give you an opportunity to share what you have. All right, at this point, Director Williams.
Okay. As I understand, the majority of the questions from the various commissioners concern the difference between the calculations for the rollback rate and what it might generate for the government and the proposed or recommended rate that I presented on Tuesday. The 2022 budget and the revenue budget associated with that was set back in November of last year, and the revenue that we used to adopt the budget assumed a little over a 3% digest growth. So you have a revenue budget that has already been set, and we have been operating on that at that level for some 7+ months now. As I showed in the presentation, just simply dropping the rollback rate into the total amount of the digest will yield a number approximately $1.2 million, which appears that would be excess revenue for the government. That assumes, as I said before, a 100% collection rate. You do not have a 100% collection rate. We budget at 98. Additionally, there is one reduction to revenue, which that calculation does not take into effect, which is the early payment discount that Richmond County has elected to provide to its citizens to generate some optional relief from their tax bill. They get a discount if they pay within 10 days, I believe. So that reduces the revenue collection from the gross number that was put out there. Additionally, there is an obligation for money that is dedicated to the TAD. Our general fund revenue budget accounts for that, and we operate at that level, but that is not illustrated in the gross calculations when you just multiply the millage rate, any millage rate times the digest. In short, at the rollback rate that has been calculated by the state, it leaves you approximately $500,000 short of what we budgeted to come in as revenue for the general fund. So that is where we are on the rollback rate. Okay, if I can proceed to the proposed rates, that does generate additional revenue for the government. Now remember, these rates, every now and then people get a little confused. These rates apply to your 2022 budget. This generates the revenue that you're operating on this year through the end of this year. It has nothing to do with the 2023 budget. This is all confined to 2022 and the effect that it will have on this fiscal year. At the proposed rate for the general fund, the 8.411, it will generate additional monies for the general fund, approximately $2 million. For fire protection, as we went over before, approximately $2.3 million, which will be dedicated to their capital outlay needs. As of the present time, fire protection does not have anything that would fund their capital outlay over the upcoming years. They normally are included in the SPLOST allocation. They do not have a SPLOST allocation for capital outlay funds in SPLOST 8. That $2.3 million would begin to allow them to address their most pressing capital needs. For the smaller capital outlay millage rate, which is 0.722, that is the same rate that it was last year. On the increased digest, it would generate, approximately $500,000 more than what was budgeted. That $500,000 would allow you to, if you chose to do so, this is capital outlay funds, to address some of your more pressing building maintenance issues that, as we have seen time after time after time, central services has come to the floor. There's a pressing need to do that. That would generate approximately $500,000 more than what we budgeted, which would be dedicated to capital outlay concerns for your facilities. The same goes for the urban services. It would generate, this is the same millage rate as it was last year. It would generate anywhere from $500,000 to $600,000. And you got to remember, urban service district, it funds, those residents do not pay the fire protection millage rate. So their fire protection is paid for by a transfer out of their urban service millage rate over to fire. So that would increase slightly that transfer, which would have to come out of urban and go over to fire to help get to that $2.3 million that I already stated. Additionally, it funds some of transit, which has been a robust discussion about being able to increase your transit services. Could be dedicated to housing and neighborhood development, which, as our external auditor brought to our attention at his presentation, that the portion that is allocated to cover administrative expenses from the various grants and programs that was received by the federal government are not sufficient to meet those needs. So that fund is subsidized, and we had to augment the subsidy that was budgeted to make up for 2021. Urban Services would be able to help do that with an increased level of revenue generation. In short, and kind of trying to sum this up as best I can, the 2022 proposed millage rate countywide is 0.634 mils less than what was levied in 2021. That is actually the lowest millage rate that has been proposed, would have been adopted, since we needed to increase the millage rate in 2014 for the ice storm and some raises for law enforcement. In 2015 through 2020, Augusta adopted the millage rate each one of those years. In 2021, we did not adopt the rollback millage rate. We had kept it the same as 2022, simply because the rollback rate would not have generated enough funds in your tax revenue to meet your budgeted level of revenues that were set during the budget. So I'll be happy to answer any questions that anyone might have. I'll do my best.
Thank you, Director Williams. Do we have any questions from members of the commission? Commissioner from the South, Mr. Frano.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My questions are for Donna. You mentioned on the collection rate that we budget at 98%, but we collect at 99%. Why do we not budget for 99% from a revenue standpoint?
Timing. I believe my answer was 99% over time. That goes on out several years as the tax commissioner attempts to collect those funds that have been billed. We anticipate approximately 98%. As you know, that they are billed in September. So we have until the end of December to collect that revenue and to post it to our current revenue collections, to show it as current revenue collected during the fiscal year. You cannot post a revenue that you do not have that goes on out several years. As I said, the collection rate goes out higher the longer you get, as the tax commissioner's office gets more aggressive in pursuing those collections. So we budget at 98%.
Okay, and how much would 1% be?
Your total approximately $480,000.
For 98 to 99 is 400, what you just said.
Yes, sir. Your total budgeted revenue is 48.6 million.
Okay. At the budget retreat last week, you mentioned that the expenses are at 43% through June 30th. Can you kind of let people know, is it typical that it's at 43%? If at that time, is there more expenses in the second half? Again, I'm trying to understand, like, because we're talking about revenue and how we got the revenue, but I think we also need to talk about expenses as well, because we might not spend as much this year as what we have budgeted either.
Yes, sir. That's fairly normal because your mid-year and reports are done on the cash basis. So you do not have the full accrual that you have toward the end of the year, when you have to go on out the next 60 days and pick up any expenditures that pertain to the present year that weren't done until the end of February. So yes, sir, that is quite normal for us to be somewhat below 50% at June 30th.
Okay. And my last question is that based on the revenue and the expenses, are they basic, like from the street light standpoint, this isn't factoring in an increase in street lights, correct?
No, sir, this does not address street lights at all.
Yeah. And then as far as like any other budgetary things that changes, whether it was Parks and Rec, whether it's the mayor's office, like none of that is pretty much whatever it was this year is what we're budgeting, that the revenue that we need to bring in, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Donna, you said the proposed rate that you have is still less than what we did in 21?
Yes,
that
sir.
what I
The proposed rate for countywide is 8.411. The rate in 2021 was 9.045. The proposed rate is 0.634 mils less than 2021's rate.
And if I'm not mistaken, you said the rollback would not give us the money that we need. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so just a very short answer. Tell me what's the biggest difference between the rollback and the proposed, other than it's not going to give us the money that we need. And
Okay. The revenue generated by the rollback rate is, as I said, is gross, and it only compares the difference between what taxes were projected to be collected at 100% in 21 and collected at 100% in 22. Now, we already budgeted for a little over 3% growth. So you have to factor that in. Plus, as I said, that's at 100% collection. So we use 98, that's standard. We've been using 98% collection to put forth our budgets probably for the last 15, 20 years. Plus, you have to take into account the discount for early payment. Last year, that was $450,000. I would expect more folks to take advantage of that. It grows somewhat every year. As I think I said on the floor the other day, the mortgage companies are required to submit within that 10-day period in order to afford their escrow holders the advantage of the early payment, the lesser rate. So is that close to what you were looking for?
yeah, and
Okay.
I guess the emphasis and the thing that I'm thinking about is that you're saying that the rollback is not going to give us exactly the money that we want. And could you tell me, is there a particular department or some particular fund that's going to be short if we go with the rollback rate? Or just, or is it just in general?
The rollback rate, the main one, the county one, affects all your departments in the general fund. And that is the sheriff's department, that is all your court system, that is recreation, your administrative departments, your elected officials, etc. All those are contained in the general fund. The tax collections from that countywide millage rate support that fund. So that's the short answer.
I got you. All right, thank you.
All right, I'm going to go to the commissioner from the 8th. Commissioner from the 8th.
Thank you, Mayor. These questions are for finance, and I think Scott Roundtree is also in on this, so he may need to chime in. So I sent out some numbers last night via Ms. Bonner. Some came from the Chamber of Commerce, some came from, just asking Scott Roundtree to look at, what the meat and potato numbers look like. And so that's what you have in front of you. And as you can see, the amount generated, as Donna just said, if you do the full rollback, it's about 1.2, 1.3 additional that we'll be able to generate. And then if you do the proposed rate, that jumps up over 7 million additional. So Mayor Pro Tem asked what the difference was between the two. You're looking at about 6 million. So, as we're looking at that and we're discussing the, which route to take in regards to the full rollback, is there a reason, Donna, why there's not a number between the proposed and the full rollback that, we could look at? And also, you made a comment that for for budgeting purposes or whatever, that, you know, we need to go ahead and approve this because of the rest of 2022's budget. Can you help me understand what you meant by that?
Well, the millage rate that you're setting today supports the 2022 budget to the tune of almost $48.5 million. If you don't set a millage rate, then you don't collect taxes. But there are timing issues that are required for you to get the process done and get your digest approved by
So
the
why doesn't this
Department of
millage
Revenue.
rate, why isn't this millage rate more specifically for the 2023 budget? That's what I'm trying to wrap my head around.
Because that's the way the law works. That's when every governing body in the state of Georgia sets their millage rate after they get their digest for the fiscal year that you're working with. This millage rate generates revenue for fiscal year 2022. This is not a new process. This is the same timing.
Look, I'm just asking the
Yeah,
question.
yeah,
I'm that's
trying to
all I'm
understand
asking.
your confusion.
Maybe it's in the way you explained it. I don't know, but
Yeah, I'm bad at that.
well, just from
So
those
Mr.
of us that
Roundtree
are,
and Ms. Parr generated some revenue numbers for you guys?
well, it was for me, and I shared it with the rest of the commission just so we could all be on the same page of what we're looking at. And, you know, it was similar to what you showed us. But I know that the business community is very concerned about the tax increases. You know, you have businesses out there that are coming out of a pandemic, but they've also been investing in our community. And I think that is something that we as a commission have to look at as we're looking at these millage rates moving forward. Is the burden that it places on these businesses that have invested here. So, and you know, as since this deals with the 2022 budget, can somebody help us understand how many unfilled positions there are currently in our budget? You know, I think that we have to look at ways that we can make some cuts if there are numerous, you know, budget retreat last week, we talked about there's 26% unfilled positions or whatever out there. So, you know, I think there are areas that we can cut, you know, as you're talking about, you're looking at a $500,000 shortfall if we do the full rollback. You know, I just think that this is a much bigger conversation than we just got to get something in the newspaper today.
And that was never intended for it's got to get in the newspaper. That is just a part of the process that is required by the Department of Revenue. It is a legally regulated process as to the timing of the setting of the millage rates. And I do not have the total amount of unfilled positions right now, but I can tell you that as we look, the very largest amount of those were over 150 or so in the sheriff's department.
Which we
That is an
actually
empty job.
which we actually provided 3 million additional to last year in the budget to help them to recruit and to retain positions. And, you know, as we're, like I said, as we're talking through this, we need to take a close look at, you know, what practices we've done in our past budgets that have worked, as well as, you know, really what are the core issues in regards to these numerous positions that are open. So, I mean, I'm going to waive right now, Mayor. I may have some other questions as we discuss more.
All right, I appreciate that. And I don't see everybody on the screen that I'm on, but if you have questions and you want to raise your hand, there's a little button that you can raise your hand. If you click on more, you're able to raise your hand, and I will see that actually in the queue. To that end, I'd like to move
Commissioner
this.
Mason hand up. Yes.
Okay. All right, Commissioner from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good morning
Yes,
to
sir.
everyone. just for a point of note, mom's feeling better for those of you that have been inquiring. So I appreciate your prayers and everything as it relates to my mom. Some of the questions that I had have been addressed to some point. But I do want to say this, that I was concerned, and I asked this question a couple of weeks ago in terms of the percentage of folks that we've lost, and it was somewhere around 25 or 26%. And so I was concerned about these lapsed salaries or empty positions. And to be honest with you, it doesn't really matter to me where they come from, whether it's the sheriff's office or any other office. That to me is something that should be taken into consideration. I also hope that we take into consideration that the school board has decided to up their millage rate. Okay, we are in the middle of a inflation for sure. Some call it a recession as well. We're in the midst of talking about putting a 3% increase in salaries to our workers, which we've debated that on the floor, and we feel that that's probably appropriate. But at the same time, the optics of it does not look well when you're talking about raising the millage rate as well. So I would hope that we will look at this comprehensively and take all of this into consideration and start looking at some creative ways in which we can give something back to our tax-paying citizens that have bear the burden, if you will, over these last 2 or 3 years as we've been in this pandemic, and as well as our businesses who have contributed to our community greatly and still trying to do what they can. There's been a lot of monies that have been allocated through, whether it's through ARP or otherwise, that have been assistance to our sheriff's office and other areas as well. And so we've got to be very, very cognizant of the fact of one, the perception, which becomes people's reality in terms of we just can't tax and spend our way out of situations. We've got to learn to do some cutting somewhere. So I would hope that we would take that into consideration, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner from the 4th. I'm going to make a few statements here because I'm going to be a real stickler about this kind of stuff. We've ended each budget year with a budget surplus. I think finance will communicate that to you. Number 2, we're not in a deficit. All right. I'm going to say that we're not in a deficit. And so I want to qualify those conversations as it relates to that. Sales tax collections continue to be strong. I want us to focus our conversation around this notion of adopting a millage rate, which is what this conversation is about. There are proposed numbers in front of us. There's a proposed rollback rate, if you will, that finance has presented. The finance director also took occasion to articulate a series of here's where there might be challenges from a budgetary perspective and where you could take those additional resources to the tune of about $2 million and you can do those things. The commission hasn't made any decisions about any of that. So I want to put that in the parking lot. More importantly, as we navigate through, we still have effectively about $8+ million of tranche 1 of ARP dollars. And you've also got tranche 2 of about $42 million of ARP dollars. So I want to just qualify these conversations while they have nothing to do with the adoption of a millage rate to be used in this context. I don't want the citizens of Augusta, when they hear certain things, assuming, well, we're at a budget deficit, we're at cost overruns and those things. That is not the case. That is not the case. And so the matter that is before us this morning is consideration for a motion to adopt the proposed mill rate as provided to the commission, with the clear understanding that that's for the publishing of that, and the commission still has opportunity and occasion to change that, accept that, or affirm that by 31 August, actually 30 August. Okay, that is the matter that is in front of us. I'm not going to make a motion at this point. or encourage you to say this is what the motion should be, but that is the single subject matter that is in front of us. And so I'm going to go back to, again, as I said, I can't see all of the hands, but I see the hand, I see the commissioner from the 7th. I'm going to pivot back to him, and then I want to move on with this matter and have a motion, and that we can at least move forward. Commissioner from the 7th.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So to that vein of what you just said, why would we post a motion, a millage rate that could possibly change? Can we post both millage rates and agree to have them both up there? That's either going to be option 1 or option 2 today, and vote on it so that both of them are there. And then we vote on it a later day when we have more information that we can make a more accurate decision on this.
Director of Finance.
You have to advertise one proposed millage rate. Once you advertise that millage rate, you can lower it before the final date of adoption. That has always been on the table. Each and every year we go through the process, there is always the availability to lower the advertised rate. What you cannot do is increase the advertised rate without starting the process over anew. That would be that is exactly what your neighboring county did. That is what some other governments have done, is they advertise the rate, and during the process, through various discussions, sometimes it is lowered.
And I appreciate that. I can tell you that I don't feel confident in doing it that way, because it seems like once the ship sailed, that it wouldn't pull back into the harbor per se. So that's why I just can't support anything but a full rollback at this time. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, sir. All right, Chair will entertain a motion at this time.
Make a motion to approve the proposed rate, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
Second. I got a motion and a second. All right, Chair recognizes the commissioner from the 8th.
I'd like to make a substitute motion that we approve the full rollback rate.
Second.
All right.
And I also had a question there for Donna.
All right, please proceed with your question.
Donna, you said that we need to advertise the rate and it could be lowered. In the history that you've been doing this over, I'm not going to say how long you've worked here. Have you ever seen the advertised rate lowered after it was advertised?
I don't think so, because in the past, there has always been a consensus what the rate would be. So it was not by us, but I have seen it done several times, both by the Board of Education and by Columbia County as well.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, Madam Clerk, we have a substitute motion to adopt the full rollback rate with a proper second from the commissioner from the 7th. We'll take a roll call vote to that matter, and then proceed from there.
Mr. Clark,
Yes.
Mr. Franham,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Garrett,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Hassan,
No, ma'am.
Mr. Johnson,
No, ma'am.
Mr. Mason,
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. McKnight,
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Scott,
No, ma'am.
Mr. Bobby Williams,
Abstain.
Mr. Dennis Williams.
No, ma'am.
That motion fails 5-4-1.
Madam Clerk, we're now at the matter of the main motion, and that is to adopt the proposed rollback rate
Yes, sir.
as presented by Finance.
Yes, sir. Mr. Clark,
No.
Mr. Franham,
No, ma'am.
Mr. Garrett,
No, ma'am.
Mr. Hassan,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Mason,
No, ma'am.
Ms. McKnight,
No, ma'am.
Ms. Scott,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Bobby Williams,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Dennis Williams.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. That fails a tie 5-5, Mr. Mayor.
Mayor.
There's a 5-5 tie, Madam Clerk.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And the mayor votes no.
Okay.
Madam Clerk, I believe that's all the business that's before us today.
Yes, sir.
All right, this meeting is adjourned.